Superman was created in 1938 by two second-generation Jewish Americans, Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster. The Man of Steel and his crime-fighting capers, Zorro by way of circus strongmen then dialed up to 11, had wide appeal, but in the hero's origins on a distant world and in his struggle to live a dual life, both the wasp-passing Clark Kent and the almost Hebraic Kal-El, there is a layer of Superman that speaks directly to his creator's experiences as Jewish Americans. This layer remained more or less visible even as the character passed into the hands of other writers, and this didn't really change until Richard Donner's 1978 Superman movie, which leaned hard on a Superman as Jesus allegory, and through its success and cultural penetration, inspired the next generations to follow it. But the Jesus allegory was never the thing that made Donner's film work, and especially as some future projects attempted to lean on such an equivalence as a primary source of meaning, its limitations became clear. All this, together with the comparative merits of a Moses allegory, I discussed in depth at the start of my Superman Isn't Jesus video series, so follow the link in the description if you want more than just the Cliffs Notes. But for the first time in a while, we have a new Superman movie, and one with a bold new vision at that. What does that mean for the cultural dominance of Superman as Jesus? Let's find out. First though, a message from today's sponsor. Today, I'm excited to tell you about Private Internet Access VPN. PIA's virtual private network hides your IP address and encrypts your internet connection, and allows you to reroute that connection through 91 countries and all 50 US states. And listen, it's 2025. You're probably aware by now that a VPN allows you to get the most out of your streaming memberships by accessing other countries' exclusive content libraries. That remains a great use case for PIA, but for a whole bunch more reasons, having a VPN kinda gets handy year after year. I'm in the UK, and over the past month or so, websites across the net have started blocking functionality in accordance with our new Online Safety Act until a user has verified their age. In theory, it's to protect kids, but in practice, it means I can't keep full usage of my YouTube, Blue Sky, or Discord accounts without sending some government contractors sensitive information. That is, unless my signal seems to be coming from some other country. See what I'm getting at? PIA never records or stores user data. That's been proved in court and by third-party auditors multiple times, and it's available across all platforms: Windows, macOS, Android, iOS, Linux, and many more, all at the same time with a single subscription. So use my link piavpn.com/pillarofgarbage to get 83% off your private internet access membership. Just $2.03 a month with 4 months free. Anyway, back to Superman. Superman 2025 is a fantastic film. Spoilers for that, by the way. Written and directed by James Gunn, the film is the first in the new DC universe and kicks off the cinematic arm of its so-called Gods and Monsters chapter. The picture follows a Superman 3 years into his superheroic career as he tries to bounce back from a loss we'll learn was orchestrated by envious billionaire Lex Luthor in a scheme tied in with international alliances, pocket dimensions, government contracts, bloodthirsty wars of conquest, dogs, clones, and much more. Superman 2025 is a fantastic film, but as you might be able to tell from that summary, Superman 2025 is also a lot. It's to his credit that Gunn's able to keep the plot, the stakes, and the lead characters from getting bogged down in a sea of secondary characters, factions, and strange new technologies. Nonetheless, it is a busy film. But nowhere in the film's 2 hours and 9 minutes does the camera oh so subtly linger on a T-posing Clark. We don't track a self-sacrificing Superman's passions as legionaries come henchmen beat him up. 0 shots recreate Michelangelo's Pieta. 0! It's almost as though they stop making Superman Jesus. And no, don't worry, I'm not saying that purely on the basis of shots which aren't in a movie. Superman 2025's eschewal of the Jesus trend goes well beyond its visuals. For one, our star, David Corenswet, is Jewish. Indeed, he is the first Jewish Superman we've seen on the big screen ever. For another, a lot of the story choices Gunn made end up pushing the Moses allegory back into center stage. The greater emphasis on Ma and Pa Kent, the very sweet way the film ends centering them, brings Clark's adoption to the fore and keeps it there. The elongated sequence where Supes carries another baby down a river pays homage to this allegory too. And maybe the biggest example of this Moses-ing is the idea of choosing right over familial expectations. Jesus' whole deal was sticking with the will of his kingly father figure, but Moses, of course, was raised in the Pharaoh's court by his daughter, the same Pharaoh that would go on to become his arch enemy. Frogs, locusts, big gnarly waves, you remember. The film's echoing of this dynamic is a little switched around. The family Moses defined himself in opposition to was his adoptive family, with Supes here it's vice versa, but an echoing it assuredly remains. It isn't that the film thumbs its nose at the Jesus reading altogether. There is space in Superman 2025 for Christian-minded viewers to overlay their hero onto ours. I'm thinking primarily of the way the world is turned against Clark through Luthor's machinations, and the way his devotion to good nevertheless perseveres, but moments like this are the exception, and their Christian resonance is always curtailed, made to remain partial, sometimes in ways that feel like explicit reorientations of prior Superman cinema. Again, recall the supremacist parents' message reveal and compare it to this.
Even though you've been raised as a human being, you are not one of them. You have great powers. They can be a great people, Kal-El. They wish to be. They only lack the light to show the way. I have sent them you, my only son.
I talked a little in my first Superman Isn't Jesus video about finding the balance between Superman's different symbolic meanings, about how characters and the ways they're read are things that evolve over time, and how, on one level, the fact that so much super media has gone to the Jesus well over the years kind of has baked the Christ parallel into the culture around Big Blue. But I set out the limitations of that parallel, and argued that while it may have a place in future Superman projects, it should never come to overshadow the older, closer Moses parallel, or the character's wider Jewish cultural substrate. Now, with Superman 2025, I think that balance has been found. Thank you for watching Superman Isn't Jesus 4. Special thanks, as always, goes to my supporters on Patreon and YouTube. Bye. Wait, you're still here? The video's over, go home. Wait, what do you mean the time bar at the bottom is showing a whole bunch more to come? Buddy, I'm clearly a personification of Pillar of Garbage who exists in the video. I can't see the time bar thingy. It doesn't exist on my level of reality. Is that even the name for it? Time bar? Well, if you're sure we're not done yet, I guess we'll just have to keep going with... Superman Isn't Jesus 5!
The story becomes visually concrete, and the story speaks to everybody. Everybody is urged, and indeed required, to take sides for or against it. Even ignoring it implies taking sides.
I'd like to talk to you about figuralism. Erich Auerbach's 1946 magnum opus, Mimesis, the Representation of Reality in Western Literature, opens with a chapter comparing Homer's representation of reality in the Odyssey to that of the so-called Elohist source in Genesis. An important part of this comparison is, well, truth. Homer's stories are diverting. They touch and they move, even today, but they do so as stories. Belief in their veracity isn't really necessary for them to land, and it wasn't necessary for them to be told either. But, to quote Auerbach,
it is all very different in the biblical stories. Their aim is not to bewitch the senses, and if nevertheless they produce lively sensory effects, it is only because the moral, religious, and psychological phenomena which are their sole concern are made concrete in the sensible matter of life. But their religious intent involves an absolute claim to truth.
The world of the scripture stories, continues Auerbach, insists that it is the only real world, is destined for autocracy, and it is promised that the whole history of mankind will be given its due place within its frame. To begin with, this was all well and good. See the Hebrew Bible. But as time went by, and especially as a splinter religion formed around a messianic desert preacher's supposed death and rebirth, and as that splinter religion spread across the Mediterranean, the need for interpretation reached out beyond the original Jewish-Israelite realm of reality, and so, according to Auerbach, this process of fitting an increasingly distant world into the frame laid out by Hebrew scripture nearly always reacted upon the frame, which required enlarging and modifying, the premier example of this modification being the way Paul and the first century church fathers reinterpreted the entire Jewish tradition as a succession of figures prognosticating the appearance of Christ. Or, to quote the gloss Auerbach gives in his next chapter,
the Old Testament was played down as popular history and as the code of the Jewish people, and assumed the appearance of a series of figures, that is, of prophetic announcements and anticipations of the coming of Jesus and the concomitant events.
This single act of interpretation, the reorientation of Jewish scripture around the Christian's Messiah Jesus, would rattle down through the ages, shaping the way medieval Europe understood history, and indeed existence itself, creating what scholars like Auerbach would eventually call figuralism. In much the same way medieval Christian metaphysics placed Earth at the center of space, figuralism placed Jesus at the center of time. In the figural view, the purpose of history before Jesus, that is, of the events described in Scripture, was essentially to foreshadow Jesus. Something like Abraham's abortive sacrifice of his son Isaac prefigured Jesus' own sacrifice and rebirth, which fulfilled that prefiguring. The soldier's wounding of Jesus' side was prefigured by the taking of Adam's rib to form Eve. And this system extended forward into the Christian era too, that is, the big pesky period of time between the resurrection and the second coming, which the medievals still happened to be living through. For instance, Auerbach points out that the exegetical linking of Adam's rib to Jesus' wound can also link those things' products. Eve as the fleshly mother of humanity past, and the church, the spiritual mother of humanity future. Or the way the Roman Empire came to be seen as an earthly prefigure for the coming kingdom of God. Links between different points in time were drawn vertically, up and through a divine plan, rather than paying attention to any horizontal causality, and history became nothing more than a grand pattern, a vast and mysterious tapestry of biblical echoes and millenarian foreshadowing, physically changing but spiritually symmetrical. And one day, the understanding was, this history of mirrors would be completed for good with the second coming of Christ. But, per Auerbach, this shift didn't come without a cost. Figuralism's conception of history was magnificent in its homogeneity, but it was completely alien to the mentality of classical antiquity. It annihilated that mentality down to the very structure of its language. Earthly relations of place, time, and cause had ceased to matter. The world, its past, present, and future, had become a series of divine images to be regarded, windowless monads with no earthly unity, no human-scale links, no chains of becoming remaining discernible between them. This might all seem entirely beside the point of a superhero movie discussion, but I don't think it is, because, in a way, there is a rank figuralism to be observed within superhero cinema today. No, really, go with me here. This figuralism is nothing new, but it has accelerated, I think, in the 15 years or so since comic book movies became a dominant force at the box office, and it is something I've criticized before on this channel, albeit not with this terminology. All Craven wants the audience to do is watch, and intermittently point Leo DiCaprio style. Oh, you thought the villain was a generic boring crime boss? Well, he's actually a boring the Rhino. And we'll make sure you know this by having him all but say it's rhinoing time to camera repeatedly. It's a very glop shito movie, as is Sony tradition, but even more so than some of those other ones, which we'll talk about soon, a big part of what meager payoff is here dangles on recognition. When Chameleon reveals his surgery and new powers to Kraven at the film's end, what's being signified is his heel turn, his following of Daddy Kravenoff's footsteps, but that's left very opaque if you don't know that there's a villain who looks like this called the Chameleon in the comic books. The emotional note the film in theory ends on too can only be heard, let alone enjoyed, if you know how Kraven typically dresses on the page. Otherwise, it's cool, he got a new vest. Oh, spoilers for Kraven the Hunter, by the way. To clarify, this comic book figuralism isn't just self-referentiality. It's when self-referentiality stands in for payoff.
Say that again?
It's fantastic.
or when self-referentiality otherwise degrades the element it's tethered to. That is, it's when horizontal meaning, causality, progression, the meaning of the text, the meaning of a character arc, is superseded by vertical meaning, the meaning of a derivative text referring to some master context outside and above it. Craven's comic book vest prefigures the movie's eventual reference, and the reference fulfills, legitimizes that original. Figuralism in this sense, adaptive figuralism we might term it, isn't unique to the comic book movie. A similar dynamic is also visible in some game adaptations, book adaptations too. But I think it is fair to say that cases like this, of fan service or quick Easter egg style head nods tipping over into this sort of hollow self-referentiality, are most common in superhero cinema. Why am I making this link in a Superman video though? Previously in the Superman Isn't Jesus series, I have criticized the clumsy Christian visuals that reoccurred throughout Zack Snyder's time with the Man of Steel. In essence, I've said they foreground a reading of these films that isn't supported by their plotting or character work. And they are doing a version of the thing we're discussing here, that is, bypassing allegory altogether in an attempt to siphon meaning directly from another master context. But although it's never come up in a Superman Isn't Jesus video before, Snyder's Superman projects are also lousy with standard issue comic book figuralism. Think about the way Dawn of Justice constructs itself around doing The Dark Knight Returns, the showdown, the gratuitous necklace close-up, and so on. This stuff doesn't stick out to the same degree as some of those Fant4-stick clunkers or your Craven vest situations, partially because Snyder's preference has always been image over concept, but regardless, it's not hard to spot vertical meaning beating out in-text meaning during these moments of self-referentiality. Take Jor-El's big speech in Man of Steel.
You will give the people of Earth an ideal to strive towards. They will race behind you. They will stumble. They will fall. But in time, they will join you in the sun count. You will help them accomplish wonders.
I trimmed the clip down for copyright reasons. I love YouTube, such a cool platform, but that is how it ends, with the stumbling, the racing, the falling, the accomplishing wonders, and most importantly that they will join you in the sun line, because that sounds cool, but what does it mean? The film's not really fixed on the sun as a symbol for anything, and Clark's certainly not gone up to it. Is it just supposed to be vaguely poetic, or... oh, they just airdropped in a Jor-El speech from All-Star Superman, where it actually does mean something. I still like that moment in Man of Steel. It's a good moment, but it's also a telling one. Very often in Snyder's DCEU, figuralism is the end, the destination, the purpose. The primary resonance of DCEU Superman's story comes from the way it does a cover version of Superman canon. Vertical meaning trumps horizontal. But it doesn't have to be that way. In his 1972 essay, The Myth of Superman, Italian writer Umberto Eco performed a revolutionary critique of the superhero genre's basic structure, arguing that a figure like Superman sits problematically at the interstice of two narrative modes, the mythic and the novelistic. Superman's story remains forever open, never truly embodying the values it purports to signify, or representing a journey through life. Superman is thus a relatable figure to whom we can't truly relate, and a mythic figure who lacks a true myth, always developing, but at the same time, always static. If any of you are getting deja vu, it's because I brought up Eco's essay in my Marvel's March Toward Meaninglessness video, and used it to anchor my concerns about the way perpetually running media franchises like the MCU sometimes overvalue stasis and end up embodying Eco's so-called oniric climate of hazy meaning. Continuing with our nutshell summary, though, Eco's essay critiques the sliding timescale at play in Superman comics, the way Clark's world never ages, never stays changed in a lasting way, the fact that DC's need to always have more stories to leave everything on the table so Superman can keep Supermaning the same way 5, 10, 20 years in a row, means there's a way in which none of it really matters on a human scale, because whereas our futures, our possible choices follow on from acts already accomplished, a character like Superman has his past acts fade soundlessly away into a dreamlike never past. Whereas our past acts build platforms toward future developments, Superman can't, for instance, take any concrete steps forward in his relationship with Lois Lane because that would lay down an irreversible premise, and thus take Clark another step toward his death. In a word, what's lacking here is realism, the sense of causality and concretion by which a character's psychology and circumstances, their past, flows through to colour their choices and determine their future. Put another way, it's a story's horizontal causality. Over time, of course, the constraints this sort of plotting placed on their story's meaning became felt by Superman's publishers too. As decades passed, any number of small things changed, but especially for flagship heroes like Superman, developments that meaningfully altered the status quo were thin on the ground. So the problem became twofold. Big picture stagnation coexisted with a stifling number of minor details. It couldn't last. 14 years after Eco's essay, DC's so-called Crisis on Infinite Earths effectively wiped canon clean, and new origins gave way to new stories, through lines seemed to be forming, but since nothing had fundamentally changed, the same type of oniric climate eventually re-emerged. DC has, to date, properly repeated that reset once more and semi-reset everything a bunch more times. In effect, one type of perpetually arrested development, one haziness of meaning, giving rise to another. But that's not to say there's no way to tell a Superman story that avoids these problems of meaning. It just has to divorce itself from the forever time of mainline comics continuity. And there's maybe no better example of such a sidestepping than the 2005 to 2008 series All-Star Superman, written by Grant Morrison, art by Frank Quitely, inked by Jamie Grant. In a 2005 interview, Morrison described the series to ComicsBulletin, and they did so in a way that initially called to mind Eco's oniric climate, saying the wish was to do a collection of universal, timeless stories, but equally there are hints in this interview of the refutation that All-Star Superman would go on to make. We're informed the project attempts to escape the shackles of continuity and its embarrassing questions. We're told the main character will be akin to a pre-crisis Superman with 20 years of history we haven't seen. In other words, a vision of a parallel world where the myth of Superman's subject, the Superman whose lack of history spurred Eco's critique, lived, aged, and chose. Across All-Star Superman's 12 issues, a story plays out. Superman saves a doomed solar mission, but in doing so, overloads his body's ability to properly process the sun's radiation, and starts dying. As Superman will eventually learn, the whole thing was planned by Lex Luthor, but the illness is real, and so the clock is ticking. Clark's also learned from some timey-wimey shenanigans that he is supposed to complete 12 labors before his time is up, so interrupted by a regular who's who of Superman rogues, Bizarros, rogue Kryptonians, the Parasite, and so on, Clark must write his final chapter. A story plays out, and by virtue of the book's standalone continuity, it is a story, not just a single blurry-edged middle frame. It's a discrete story, one with a beginning, middle, and most important, most shocking, an end. The meaning here, which this 12-issue series has in spades, is horizontal and comes from the realist continuum, linking acts already accomplished to future choices. So it's hard not to view All-Star Superman as, on some level, a counter to Eco's essay. And maybe it was always meant to be one. Returning to their ComicsBulletin interview, I'll quote Morrison.
No matter who is writing the stories, some essential archetypal Superman always remains intact. And it's that primal core, that soul of Superman, that we're putting onto the pages of All-Star.
Now, All-Star Superman's vision of its character, the soul it channels, is not unique. But the forward momentum with which that soul is painted, the way the plot consumes itself, kind of is. Lois finds Clark's identity out. Lex Luthor is thwarted. All the while, Superman's internal clock is ticking until at the end, he dies. You know, more or less. Episodic, ongoing storylines coalesce horizontally into a unified, substantive whole that fills in the essence of Superman in a gradual but definitive manner. In other words, then, All-Star Superman finally sets down the myth of Superman. To be clear, it isn't that there's no realism, no moments foregrounding the horizontal causality and progression of the text in Snyder's Superman movies. One of the most lauded moments of the entire DCEU shows us precisely this, Dawn of Justice's opening, which tracks Man of Steel's events through Bruce Wayne's perspective, powerfully threading his motivation, his past, through the prior film's story. It's a fantastic sequence, but it is just one sequence, and it's a sequence the film uses to set up the board for Dark Knight Returns come Death of Superman climax pastiche. This is realism in service of figuralism, and in that regard it's kind of the opposite of the adaptive philosophy underlying Superman 2025. If you've been keeping up with the news around Gunn's film, you'll no doubt have realised one of the reasons I brought All-Star Superman into this video's conversation was the much publicised fact that Morrison, Quietly and Grant's series served as a major point of inspiration. But unless you're a big comics guy yourself, you might not have realised that the borrowing the film displays is rarely direct. Both texts feature Luthor as primary antagonist, both feature Superman's fortress robots, there's Crypto, and there's, well, that's sort of it for anything one-to-one. Both projects do include a pair of Kryptonian supremacists who shake Superman's image of the Lost World, but in the film, these are Superman's parents, not All-Star Superman's Bar and Lilo L. In both texts, there's a crisis of faith at the Kent family farm, but there's very little similarity between the two beats on any level beyond that. No, what's really being adapted here is tone, is spirit. It's a bright Superman, a human Superman, a Superman who hopes, a Superman striving to prove the worth of that hope to the world and to himself, a Superman whose story proves that worth to us by developing, by rejecting the meaningless hamster wheel stasis studied in the myth of Superman. And I think Gunn's Superman takes that rejection even further than Morrison's did. One part of Eco's essay I didn't focus too much on in that MCU video was its ending, where it's observed that while those immobilizing metaphysics that lock Superman in stasis were a function of the comic book hero's unique formal situation, they were also an expression of the ideological limiters Superman writers and editorial had internalized. The world, he writes, has the same configuration as the structure which expressed it. Eco goes on to draw out his point more clearly.
From a man who could produce work and wealth in astronomic dimensions in a few seconds, one could expect the most bewildering political, economic, and technological upheavals in the world. From the solution of hunger problems to the tilling of uninhabitable regions, from the destruction of inhuman systems. Superman could exercise good on a cosmic level, or a galactic level, and furnish us in the meantime with a definition that through fantastic amplification could clarify precise ethical lines everywhere.
Instead,
in Superman, we have a perfect example of civic consciousness, completely split from political consciousness. Superman's civic attitude is perfect, but it is exercised and structured in the sphere of a small, closed community, in which the only visible form that evil assumes is an attempt on private property, and good is represented only as charity.
Superman could make no bigger, radical, politically minded gestures because taking these steps would push his story and his world forward, would advance its frozen, horizontal causality, and that causality remains frozen. His world does not leap forward into war or famine or crisis to allow that pantomime heroism, those civic individual good deeds, to appear weighty, to seem Superman's proper area, to stop the reader from asking why Superman doesn't stop the tanks. This is where Superman 2025 steps up. This is perhaps the greatest way in which Gunn's film thaws that frozen, horizontal level of Superman's meaning. We can see this thawing, and indeed another example of the film's indirect adaptive philosophy, by considering another comic that's been touted as an inspiration for Superman 2025, Action Comics 775, What's So Funny About Truth, Justice, and the American Way. This issue, written by Joe Kelly, sees Superman confronted by an upstart new metahuman squad, the Elite, led by a figure named Manchester Black. The Elite go around the world fighting injustice, as they see it, in a very direct, collateral damage-y, loss-of-life-y way. Clark objects, and in a storyline that doubles as meta-commentary on the contemporary trend of grim, edgy, morally grey super characters, he must find a way to beat them and prove them wrong. Aside from the straightforward mirroring of a few comic book details in the film, a story kicked off by a geopolitical conflict, our being introduced to that story through a series of chronologically contextualizing text pop-ups, Remix remains the name of Superman 2025's adaptive game. It's most obvious in the film's interpolation of the elite. There's something of a split echo of the comic squad between the film's Justice Gang and Lex's meta-human goon squad. Both are effectively more modern, cynical takes on superhero squads, here corporate-sponsored rather than anarcho-punk types who Superman's old-fashioned efforts in sincerity either beat or inspire. But more is being done with what's so funny than meets the eye, and we can start to pin it down by holding that story's title, its full title, up against Gunn's film. A major element of Superman 2025 is the tension between truth and justice on the one hand and the American way on the other. In text, Superman is under fire for standing up for human life against the US allied country, and as a result, the government comes to see him as hostile, and has him sent away to a concentration camp in El Salvador. No, wait, a pocket dimension. Why did I say El Salvador? It's an element that's been mirrored in the film's reception, too. Large parts of the US media ecosystem have railed against this film's supposedly radical pro-immigrant messaging, and the film ends with Superman's dedication to those first two values catching, leading the Justice Gang to support his unsanctioned foreign intervention and stop Boravia's invasion of Jahanpur. So while there's certainly a joke to be made here about how nothing embodies the American way like unsanctioned foreign intervention, we have on our hands a text for whom truth, justice, and a better tomorrow involve acting against unjust status quos and directly opposing fictional American policy and real-world media mores. Hawkgirl even kills the Boravian dictator, and while I wouldn't necessarily say the film frames this as a great thing, it certainly is not condemned. So truth? Sure. Justice? Yep. The American way? Superman 2025 mirrors What's So Funny then, but almost in reverse. Consider that the elite's first public act, the one that sets Superman against them, is the violent stopping of a terror attack in Libya during which Manchester Black severs a general's legs, and that the Justice Gang's final act, the one Superman inspired, is the violent stopping of a terror attack during which Hawkgirl pops a president's skull. Listen to this quote from Manchester Black and tell me you can't hear it coming out of David Corenswet's mouth.
We're human beings, with the power to make a difference, doing what any normal person would, given the chance.
Now, it must be stressed that the elite are not good guys. They're dressed up in anarchist tropes and do spout a few real anarchist values. They're against nations, boundaries, classes, and so on. But very conveniently for this Superman, that's all more or less a front for nihilistic, might makes right ego tripping. I do tend to like Joe Kelly as a writer, but there's definitely a laziness here, caricaturing villains in the language of radical politics, only to disengage with that language as soon as is convenient. You know, it's giving flag smashes. So if there is a sense in which Superman 2025 adapts the values of the elite into those of this Clark, it's looking past Kelly's caricature and back into the language that caricature is perverting. This Superman is the sort of hero Manchester Black pretended to be, extracting real optimism from its feigning, and as a result, Gunn's indirect adaptive philosophy ends up yes-anding the classic story. Sure, the film seems to say, the triumph of hope and virtue over nihilism, great stuff. But why not allow that hope to go beyond the level of the individual, the civic? Why should virtue consist of many little activities on a small scale? What if Superman could exercise good on a higher level, on a political level, good that went beyond charity and became action? What if indeed? Admittedly, it remains to be seen how well the new DCU will negotiate the problems of ongoing continuity we've discussed, but from the perspective of 2025 at least, Gunn's film pursues a vital, contemporary, human rendition of the Superman myth, prioritizes the story's telling in these terms refuting the idea that Superman must be an example of civic consciousness completely split from political consciousness, over adherence to the precise contours of the source material. That isn't to say it ignores the comics or Superman's existing status as a pop culture behemoth, but it is to say that in considering the way Superman 2025 performs self-referentiality, does engage with that source material, we can see a contrast to the Snyder years. The movie draws from the stories which inspired it, but is never beholden to them. Here, horizontal meaning takes precedence over vertical. Here, any semblance of figuralism serves realism, not the other way around. Before we end, let's think back to Auerbach's reading of the Hebrew Bible. As we noted near the start of the video, the purpose of this scripture is to communicate a truth, but it doesn't do so via the construction of figures, elaborate cross-historical parallels for which horizontal causality and the progressive continuity of human acts are meaningless. No, it communicates that truth via those acts. Auerbach argues the key to this message's delivery lies in the development Scripture depicts in individuals like Jacob and David, the way God picks them up, works them, and produces from them forms of meaning.
They are bearers of divine will, and yet they are fallible, subject to misfortune and humiliation, and in the midst of misfortune and in their humiliation, their acts and words reveal the transcendent majesty of God.
Unlike the figuralism through which medieval Christian thinkers conveyed their sense of divinity, in the Hebrew Bible, suggests Auerbach, the progression of God's plan is shown through the progressing lives of men, through a sort of proto-realism. The scripture of the Elohist, the psychology of its characters, these things are fraught with background, writes Auerbach. Character is multi-layered. The Jewish writers are able to express the simultaneous existence of various layers of consciousness and the conflict between them. Meaning is expressed horizontally, not vertically. I don't want to conclude by telling you there's a difference between Jewish and Christian ways of thinking that's mirrored in the contrast between Gunn's Superman and Snyder's. That would be so broad and so reductive a statement as to blast past untruth into not even wrong territory. But I will say that in following Auerbach, in looking back to the changes early Christians made to their movement's reading of Jewish scripture, a spectacular, magnificent flattening, we can find novel and, I think, effective ways of conceptualizing what this newest Superman film does differently from its predecessors and why those things work. Thank you for watching. Thanks again to PIA for sponsoring this video, and a huge and this time real shout out to all my supporters on screen now, especially Hanan, Daniel Golton, Harry Price, Kwang Yu Liu, Something Something Capitalism Bad, Thomas R, and Weirdy Beardy. Support like theirs is essential for videos like this to keep existing, so if you enjoyed this, you have them to thank too. Any new pledges make a big difference. Think about it. Bye.